"What are you doing, Grandpa, showing off?" the junior sergeant said, glaring at the veteran's medal as if it were a fake. The sound of breaking glass cut through the midday heat as two burly policemen, sweating under their black vests, yanked a limp hand from under the strap of a bag. Children danced with ice cream at the bus stop. Women clutched their bags instinctively, but no one left the scene. The scene drew eyes like a fire. Someone picked up their phone. The red dot on the recording began to blink, reflected in the guard's fogged-up glasses. "He's an Afghan," shouted a guy in a t-shirt with the Spartak Football Club's image. "For you, chicken, I'd rot in the sand," rang out the voice of an elderly man in a faded field jacket, his entire chest adorned with the familiar metal bars. He didn't even have time to straighten up before his face with its gray stubble hit the hot hood of a parked Niva car with a dull thud. "What are you doing?" The crunching click of plastic zip ties was heard in response. The old man's thin arms, darkened by the sun and covered in scars, were twisted behind his back. Despite the hot day, he was shaking not from physical weakness, but from the rage that overwhelmed him, which was held back by his straight, motionless body, as if frozen in anticipation. The beret with the faded emblem of the motorized rifle troops rolled onto the sidewalk. "Stop it! He has medals!" The woman in the lilac headscarf took a step forward, but then stopped. The second policeman put his hand on the holster. The grandfather did not make a sound. Only a short phrase escaped his lips, as if exhaled along with the dust. "Quiet, daughter. We did not survive the terrible things to give in now." A wave of nervous excitement rolled through the crowd. The words sounded so quiet that they had to strain their ears, and their meaning hit harder than a siren. The leather boots of the policeman began to tap in time with the nervous tapping of his heel on the asphalt. "Enough fairy tales. Stop it!" The senior officer jerked the veteran, opening the door of the police car. "We will draw up a report for disobedience." At the very moment the tin door slammed shut, the bus stop seemed to be doused with boiling water. Some were cursing, some were crying, but no one dared to intervene. The wind stirred the St. George ribbon tied to the veteran's old backpack, which remained on the bench. The black and orange stripes fluttered like a distress signal flag, and inside the van there was tightness, dust, and a heavy premonition. The old man raised his head, tearing his cheek from the cold metal wall, and stared out the murky window. Somewhere out there, above the roofs of the 5-story buildings, a thunderstorm was beginning. He closed his eyes and slowly, as if checking the integrity of every bone, straightened his shoulders. The sergeant, on the contrary, took this as a challenge and moved closer, but the veteran remained motionless. There was no blood on the detainee's face, only a thin red line from the recently removed oxygen mask he had been wearing since a heart attack 3 years ago. It resembled a burnt chain, as if invisible shackles were accompanying him here too. Far away, almost inaudibly, the keys jingled, the door would be locked from the inside, and the van would set course for the department. But before the bolt clicked, the old man quietly said, addressing not so much the guard or the crowd as the empty sky, 4 minutes, exactly 4. The words dissolved in the air, but the anxious countdown had already begun. The bell rang again, this time metallic, and the elderly man, without a surname, was seated on a creaky chair under a peeling coat of arms. The duty officer filled in the column with a dash. The detainee was silent, swaying slightly, as if trying to catch someone else's bustle, an echo of distant gunfire. Only when the young investigator, crumpling the protocol, asked, "Date of birth, did he say May 29th, 1941? And then the papers seemed to come to life. They wrote in the protocol, Sergei Ivanovich Chernov. The investigator looked up. The name sounded familiar. The town lived with other people's words, Afghanistan, Grozny, Botlich, but rarely understood their true value. Sergei Ivanovich bore this price on himself. Under the faded fabric of his jacket, where long uncleaned metals dimly gleamed, there were scars, dented fragments, a wound in the knee. At home, in a small 2-room apartment next to Victory Park, only a ticking alarm clock and neatly tied dahlias on the balcony awaited him. Chernov was a widower. His wife Galina died 8 years ago, before they could celebrate their bronze wedding anniversary. Their son died near Kankala, blown up by a landmine. Since then, the veteran lived with his grandson Yegor, a 17-year-old schoolboy who trained to run with his grandfather's backpack so that he could one day enter the Ryazan Higher Airborne Command School. In the mornings, Sergei Ivanovich repaired irons and electric stoves for his neighbors. His hands remembered the soldering iron as well as the machine gun. In the evenings, he wandered around the market, choosing flexible stems for dahlia cuttings. And if his leg hurt, he sat on a bench where young people listened to music from their phones. Once a month, he sent real paper letters to his combat friends. Alexei Skif, Polyansky, Amin Klik Magomedov, and the Dagestani Said Akhmedov. The letters were sent to Kaluga, Grozny, Makhachkala, and always began the same way. Alive whole, my leg sings to the rain. There were rumors that last spring Chernov had participated in the development of a secret report on abuse of power by some district departments of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. He had gone to Moscow for a closed meeting, but had returned silently, only hiding a thin red folder in his desk. Today he had gone to the market early, wanting to buy wire for tying up plants. At the bus stop, under the windows of the Slavyansky Bank, 3 young men pushed him, laughing at the rusty pieces of iron. He responded with only a look, and soon the police arrived. Someone had complained that an incomprehensible old man was threatening them with a knife. The knife turned out to be a folding pruning shears. So he found himself here, under the whistle of a fan and the echo of footsteps in the corridor. The investigator, having filled in the last line, chuckled. "Retired lieutenant colonel, respectable but does not cancel the administrative punishment." "Are you talking about the uniform or about fate?" the veteran quietly clarified, and she, unaccustomed to such a tone, looked away. The second hand clicked 12 times. Sergei Ivanovich noted to himself. 2 minutes had passed since he was seated. Less than half remained until the promised 4. An angry argument was heard from the neighboring office. The operative was talking to an invisible interlocutor. "Will your superiors call back?" The phrase sounded like a raven croaking on wires. Chernov did not pay attention. His gaze slid along the wall, where photographs of local police officers from ski competitions hung. Suddenly, the key on the latch jingled, and a strong man with 2 silver stars on his shoulder straps entered the room. "What are you doing here, old man?" He sat down, tapping his pencil on the table. "Decided to take justice into your own hands?" "I just sat down to wait for the bus," the veteran replied. "Yeah, and I took out a knife. Secateurs, what's the difference?" "Do you want to be sent to a mental hospital?" Chernov remained silent. The department chief waved his hand irritably. "Bring the guy who filmed all this here. Let him delete the recording," he shouted into the corridor. The veteran calmly adjusted his beret, which was returned to him along with his personal belongings. In his inside pocket, he felt a thin metal badge with the engraved date 79th. 3 minutes. He remembered the night in Kandahar when he counted the seconds until reinforcements arrived. Then, too, they promised 4 minutes and said that help was just around the corner. And help came. "The longer you keep me here," he said, "the shorter your next workday will be." The boss laughed, as if he had heard a good joke. "Are you trying to scare me? After all, you're on bail raising your grandson." "I'm reminding you of the truth." The veteran closed his eyes. The noise of the corridor faded away, his steps slowed. He knew that the countdown was drawing to a close. Sergei Ivanovich was waiting for them to start pressuring him. Not his documents. He understood that the system was protecting itself with paperwork. First, 40 pages of reports. Then, emptiness. A gust of wind blew open the window, and a copy of the statement, allegedly written by a random passerby, fell on the table. Threatened with a knife, attacked children. The handwriting was girlish, the letters soft. It was written by the same interrogator, but from someone else's words. "Sign," the chief poked his finger at the white field, "and you'll go home." Chernov slowly raised his head. The silence, like a rusty nail, was screwing into the chief's brain. "What, pride getting in the way?" he grinned. "Today you're nobody, and we're the power. A thin female voice came from the corridor. "Let me go, I just want to get my phone back." And a short male shout, "Back!" The door slammed. Chernov remembered Afghanistan. No dust, no roar, but the silence before a salvo of a grad, when even the dogs fell silent. Now it smelled exactly the same, burnt iron and sudden fear. "I won't sign," the veteran said. Assasa said. "Okay." The chief leaned his elbows on the table. "Then Article 23, insubordination, a fine or 15 days. Do you feel more comfortable this way?" The veteran stood up, his leg bent treacherously, and he leaned on the back of the chair. "Sit down," the chief barked, but his voice trembled. There was something too even, too steely in the veteran's eyes. Handcuffs were taken out of the closet. The interrogator recoiled. "Why?" "He's here just in case." The chief clicked the steel rings like a blacksmith on an anvil. The tie snapped shut, and the metallic sound echoed down the corridor like a gong announcing the start of a fight. At that moment, the door to the reception room swung open. The duty lieutenant ran in, his face white from the paper. "Comrade Chief, we have—" "What is this?" The officer could not stand it. "There are some soldiers in the yard, probably contract soldiers brought someone in. Tell them to wait. There are tigers without numbers and bulletproof vests without chevrons. They lined everyone up at the checkpoint." The chief froze, as if he had suddenly seen someone else's uniform on his own shoulders. Chernov sat back down, chuckling. 3 minutes, 15 seconds. "Who gave you permission to count?" the chief snapped. "I'm asking questions here." But the door jerked again, and a 2-meter-tall man without a cap stepped into the office. On his chest was a black patch reading Kadyrov Special Battalion, but without a name. An officer with a red folder followed. "Who are you?" The chief stood up. "Federal Special Department of the Ministry of Defense," the bass boomed without a trace of emotion. "Where's Lieutenant Colonel Chernov?" He pointed to a chair. The guest nodded. His eyes froze on the veteran with a warm, almost familial squint. "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, you were only wounded in pride," Chernov answered. "We'll take it off now." The guest took the key to the handcuffs from his breast pocket. "This is the detainee." The chief tried to object. "We have an administrative case." "You have a headache," the prosecutor corrected, putting the red folder on the table. "And also an unscheduled inspection based on 4 statements about abuse of authority signed by the Deputy Minister of Defense." The chief's face twisted as if gravel had been poured into his mouth. The investigator crossed herself, looking around the closet, the walls, the ceiling. "This is civilian territory," the chief muttered. "Russian territory, citizen," the guest clarified. "The federal level is higher than the district level." The key clicked, freeing the veteran's hands. The metal rings fell on the table, and the silence seemed to slam the door between the worlds. "Before and after, what, without a court decision?" the chief began. "Is there a decision?" The prosecutor unfolded the folder. On top lay photocopies of torture reports, confiscated medical records, statements from the mothers of missing detainees. "Your signatures." Sweat rolled down the chief's temple. For a moment, he saw himself in someone else's eyes, small, confused. "Chernov is listed as a witness," the prosecutor said. "You obstructed. This is a new composition." The investigator hid behind the computer screen. Someone in the corridor was choking from nausea. Suddenly, someone yelled over the radio, "Second post, urgently! There are people at the gate!" The chief rushed to the window. The square in front of the district police department was crowded with people with division flags and veterans' photographs on their chests. Gray-haired men in camouflage and young guys in green berets were blocking the road. Someone was holding a banner. "You can't take away the honor of the medal." The veteran stood up. His leg clicked, but he didn't wince. "My grandson is writing a test now," he said, looking the chief in the eye. "Will I make it in time for lunch? Line up." The guest nodded toward the door. 5 minutes and you weren't here." Chernov adjusted his beret and looked up at the clock face. 4 minutes, 47 seconds. The promise was kept with a vengeance. Comrades, the prosecutor turned to the chief and chewed each word like metal chips. Suspended. Weapons and ID on the table. Immediately. The sound of pistols being laid out on the glass of the table sounded like a funeral bell. I did not. The chief looked around as if looking for a loophole to escape. Too late, the veteran said dryly. My men are there too. And indeed, 2 more tigers flashed past the windows. The wind shook the St. George ribbon on the backpack that one of the soldiers carefully carried with both hands like a banner. A wave of resounding silence rose from the corridor to the office. In this silence, destinies rang. Words lost their power, actions remained. Sergei Ivanovich looked at the handcuffs and saw in their circle not a chain, but an open hoop, an emptiness where there was humiliation. Now there is freedom, brought by brotherhood. The Special Forces soldier with the Kadyrovsky stripe turned to the interrogator. Take the citizen into the corridor. Explain the procedure to her. She obediently stood up but lingered at the door. Sorry, she turned to the veteran. I really didn't mean to. He raised his palm, interrupting. Actions are more important than apologies. Show this in your report tomorrow. Something like bitterness flashed in her eyes. She left, closing the door behind her. Meanwhile, the prosecutor carefully laid out new papers on the table. A decree on the removal of officials, an order for an internal investigation, an order to transfer the cases to a military tribunal to check the connections between the district police department and private security structures involved in extortion. Do you really think so? The chief asked in a trembling voice. That you have enough authority? And do you have enough conscience? The prosecutor answered. Your department insulted the honor of an officer who defended this country before you learned how to properly fasten your belt. Sergei Ivanovich felt a heaviness in his heart, not from the words, but from how the neighboring world was falling apart at the seams. He was taught to save a comrade at any cost, but how to save those who put on a uniform to beat the weak? He took a deep breath. His leg ached, old sounds were creeping up on him, the whistle of mortars, the pop of a grenade. He turned off the past with an effort of will. Here and now, something different was required, to stand up straight when others were falling. No, we came with weapons, the veteran said quietly. They came with you when you decided that shoulder straps were an indulgence. No one objected. Footsteps, the slamming of folders, muffled conversations could be heard behind the thin wall. Something was breaking in these walls. Not concrete, but a habit of impunity. A distant siren announced the approach of the regional leadership, the head of the UMVD, and investigators from the investigative committee. This was what happened in Chechnya when the boss arrived at his position. First, the rotors of the helicopters rustled. Then there was the smell of kerosene and fear. Time, the prosecutor said. Let's take him away. 2 fighters took the veteran by the arms. Not as a detainee, but as a dear guest being helped out of a stuffy room. Passing by the chief, Chernov lingered. Their eyes met. In one, resentment, confusion. In the other, quiet fatigue. I'm not taking revenge, the veteran said. I'm reminding you. Then he stepped into the corridor, where the air already smelled of fresh plaster, as if they had decided to rebuild the building and tore off the first layer of old paint along with the lies. A through gate made of steel panels, covered in layers of peeling green paint, led into the courtyard of the district department. And now these panels gaped wide, like broken teeth, allowing 3 armored tigers to drive through, which on a normal day you could only see on the news from the Caucasus. The engines were idling, breathing out hot diesel. Machine gunners were dozing on the armor. Their faces were hidden by masks, and their eyes in the black cutouts seemed like steel rivets. The people in the yard parted, but did not run away. People in camouflage, broad-shouldered, some with canes, some with scars on their foreheads, lined up in front. These were Cherny's friends, those with whom he shared the damp soil of the trenches, the night marches, and endless raids in the mountains. They never called themselves veterans because the war in the soul never ends as long as at least one person is alive who remembers it. They called themselves brothers. 4 minutes, said a tall Chechen in a thin tactical jacket, looking at his watch. We're a little late. We're getting old. His name was Amin Magomedov. Under the call sign Fang, He went through the second campaign from Gudermes to Itumkali. Standing nearby was Alexei Polyansky, Skif, a former sapper, now chairman of the Central District Combatants Council. The third man in the group was Saeed Akhmedov, a short Dagestani with eyes the color of a stormy sea, a former intelligence officer and now an instructor at a children's military patriotic club. "Is Sergei Ivanovich here?" Amin asked one of the fighters who met them on the steps. The man nodded silently toward the building. "Get to business," Skiv said curtly, striding forward. "No ceremony." They entered the corridor. The air inside was thick with dust and sweat. The police, seeing the unfamiliar uniform, backed away, pressing themselves against the walls, as if they could dissolve them. One junior lieutenant, barely 20, raised his machine gun. "Back! No entry, son," said quietly, without changing his pace. "Have you ever jumped with a parachute from 800 meters? What? Then lower the weapon before your knees break from fear." The lieutenant lowered the machine gun. Magomedov's men moved like a single shadow. They did not run, did not shout, but the walls seemed closer as they passed. They entered the captain's office without knocking. The prosecutor, already standing by the window, nodded in greeting. "Only 60 seconds late," he noted, but the effect was still impressive. Amin smiled at the corner of his mouth. "Who counted?" he asked. "Lieutenant Colonel?" The prosecutor winked. "He has discipline." Sergei Ivanovich sat on a chair, his hands free, but the handcuffs lay on the table like dead beetles whose legs had been torn off. He stood up, seeing his friends, and for the first time that day, his lips straightened into a weak but sincere smile. "Why did you raise such a fuss?" asked Skiff, clapping his comrade on the shoulder. "Did you think we had nothing better to do in retirement?" "Couldn't resist the pleasure of getting you together again," the veteran replied, "at least for a couple of minutes." The captain, still frozen against the wall, tried to find his voice. "You can't interfere like that." "We can," said softly, "and we will. We have a mandate from the main military prosecutor's office to represent a witness in a case of abuse of power." "What other case?" The captain felt like the ground beneath his feet had turned to sand. "We don't. We do." The prosecutor pointed to the red folder again. 4 volumes, reports, audio recordings, medical reports. Since last summer, you have been systematically beating detainees. You have hushed up 150 appeals. Now the hush has failed. A rumble of voices could be heard in the corridor. The inspection team from the Regional Investigative Committee was trying to get through, but was running into a tight ring of veterans. Magomedov stepped toward the door, opened it, and waved his hand. "Let me in." And the ring opened, letting in civilians in gray suits. First came the colonel of the Regional Investigative Committee, then the deputy prosecutor of the region. They greeted the veterans as equals, not according to regulations, but from the memory of the common trench of any war, where people are divided into those who shoot and those who pray, regardless of their shoulder straps. "Who is the shift supervisor?" the colonel asked, looking around the room. The captain took a step forward, blushing. "Weapons and ID on the table," the colonel said immediately. For the second time that day, metal touched glass. The captain lowered his eyes, as if it were not a weapon that lay there, but his own honor. Near the window, Amin noticed a nail knocked out of the frame and raised an eyebrow. "I'm ashamed of such a mess, Captain. Do you have a budget for repairs?" "Where is it?" He remained silent. "Okay," Magomedov sighed. "They don't give you a license, they take it." He turned to the prosecutor. "We need to get Sergei out. His leg is weak, and the air here is stale." The prosecutor nodded. One of the fighters called for medics. There were ice cubes and painkillers in the black tactical bags, but Sergei Ivanovich refused a stretcher. He insisted on going himself, holding his friends by the elbow only when the steps hurt their knees, while they were going down the stairs, and faces peered out from every office. Curiosity mixed with confusion. Along the corridor, portraits of superiors began to be removed from their hinges. Someone from below shouted, "Remove the rank before it's too late." In the courtyard, people parted, forming a living corridor. Someone wanted to applaud, but Alexei Skif waved his hand. The silence was louder than any ovation. Halfway there, the veteran sat down on a concrete curb to catch his breath. His leg was throbbing, his lungs were whistling from the stale air. Amin sat down next to him, putting his hand on his comrade's shoulder. "Remember 95?" he asked. "When we were leading the children out of Novia Kaldei?" "There was smoke there," Sergei nodded. "And a quiet, quiet prayer." Amin smiled with his eyes alone. Sweat glistened on his eyelashes. "Today, too, a prayer only for justice." People were gathering behind the iron fence. The press was arriving, but the people in camouflage politely asked that the cameras be removed. This was not a day for television. A viscous silence descended on the ground, like sapper smoke after an explosion. People understood. Right now, before the eyes of the city, the pseudo-force booth was collapsing. And something old, long forgotten, was emerging through the empty space. Respect. Sergei Ivanovich stood up. His body protested, but his spirit was invigorated. He saw his grandson Yegor in the crowd, standing clutching his grandfather's backpack as if passing the baton. The young man's eyes were shining, but not with tears, but with pride. "Grandpa," Yegor whispered, "we'll wait at home." "Do you remember how many minutes we had there near Shalinskoy?" the veteran asked. 7, and today 4 was enough, he smiled. The world is learning after all. The first rumble of a thunderstorm rumbled in the sky. The dust pressed itself to the ground, and there was a smell of ozone and freedom. People did not yet know what would happen tomorrow, but they felt that today they had done something that neither rain nor time would wash away. The night rain covered the city with a silvery net, washing away the smell of burning, but not the anxiety. In the office of the acting head of the Department of Internal Affairs, the windows were wide open. The heavy air did not go away, as if it had absorbed the stains of shame. On the table stood a thermos of tea without a saucer and a sheet of paper, a copy of the order from the Ministry of Defense. The heading said about the introduction of Alpha Control and a review of the personnel files of employees. Sergei Ivanovich sat on an old sofa covered with an army raincoat. A cold at the front taught him the importance of dry heat. Next to him, the prosecutor leafed through documents, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said finally, "according to the reports, it was you who provided the analysts with the data on the basis of which facts of systematic violence were revealed." The veteran took a sip of tea. "I passed on the lists of appeals from mothers and wives. My friends collected information. We have no right to remain silent when people are broken for a cigarette or for an unnecessary question. Why did you hide the name? Because the name overshadows the content, and the content is important." The prosecutor nodded. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a brand new audit report detailing fraud. The purchase of 12 computers for the price of a trawler. The renovation of a shooting gallery that no one had seen. Too many holes, too much blood for them not to be noticed. The door opened quietly. Amin, Alexei, and Saeed entered. They took off their wet berets, unbuttoned their vests, and sat in a semicircle in front of their friend. "People in the city are collecting candles," Syed said. "They're already laying down a raincoat at the tomb of the unknown soldier to keep the photographs dry." "We asked for no show," the veteran sighed. "This is not show," Alexei objected. "This is a memorial not to us, but to the fact that the humiliation of a veteran humiliates the country." The prosecutor placed another document on Alexei's lap. "Here is a petition from the Council of the Federation of Veterans to award Sergei Ivanovich the title of Honorary Citizen of the region." "Unnecessary," the veteran waved it off. "Necessary," said, "so that future generations will have something to compare their behavior with." The door creaked again, letting in a new guest. A tall man in a civilian raincoat pressed against a wetsuit. He introduced himself as the Deputy Minister of Defense. His handshake was firmer than expected from an official. "I convey the minister's gratitude," he said, sitting down opposite the veteran. "But we understand that gratitude is words. We are ready to act." He laid out a regional map, marking 3 problem areas with red crosses. There are similar requests here. Are you ready to accompany the group as a consultant? Chernov took a deep breath. His leg ached, his heart yearned for peace. But then he remembered the boy with the video camera, the woman in the purple headscarf, the girl who had laid flowers at the memorial yesterday. Yes, he replied, but with conditions. The minister raised an eyebrow. First, each detainee is provided with a lawyer until the next day. Second, CCTV cameras are not switched off under any circumstances. Third, reports are published openly, without censorship. The room went silent, as if the streetlights had gone out. The minister nodded slowly. It will be done. Fourth, the veteran added, no parade, no celebrations. This is not a holiday, but work on mistakes. Amin snapped his fingers with a smile. And we've already come up with a hashtag. He stopped short, noticing his friend's gloomy look, and sighed. Just kidding. No banners. Everyone laughed quietly, almost inaudibly. A nervous, fleeting relief that quickly dissipated like a drop of alcohol. The minister wrote down the conditions, then took a thin envelope from his briefcase. Here is an order for monetary compensation. We know your pension. The veteran raised his hand. I didn't stand at the bus stop for a pension. Leave the compensation to the families of those detained whose bones were broken. Silence fell over the room like a blanket. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the prosecutor handed the envelope back to the official. We'll find a way, he said. The clock struck midnight. The light bulb on the ceiling flickered, as if unable to bear the weight of what had been said. We have to go, said Said, standing up. Dawn is in 5 hours. The veteran rose with difficulty. The raincoat fell from his shoulders. Amin helped him put on a dry jacket and handed him his cane. Leg? He asked in a whisper. Like sand creaking, Sergei chuckled. The good old sound. They went out into the corridor. The investigator was standing there. Her hands were shaking, her eyes were red. Lieutenant Colonel, she began. Publish the truth, Chernov interrupted her. Otherwise you will waste your precious youth. She nodded, clutching the folder to her chest. Her steps faded away, dying away in the darkness of the corridor. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the moon emerged from behind the clouds. The air smelled of wet asphalt and flowers. The same dahlias that Yegor had tied up on the balcony yesterday. Have you seen Marchenko's son? Alexei suddenly asked, adjusting his shoulder strap. Yes, Sergei answered. He became a doctor. That means we were not in vain. The evening of 1968 surfaced in his memory. Young faces, a promise to survive and meet at home. Half of the promises had perished in the ravines, but the other half was sitting in the department yard, smelling of fuel oil and memories and still able to keep their word. The minister followed, talking on the phone. The signal cut through the silence, but no one was irritated. Hope for change was now woven into this restless ringing. Left alone at the Tiger, the veterans took off their wet jackets and stared at the dark windows of the department. The light inside went out. Office after office, floor after floor. You know, said, sometimes you just have to turn off the light to see who will remain in the room. And sometimes, Sergei answered, to understand who will turn on the lamp again. Alexei looked back at the square. Where the crowd had stood during the day, there were now tea lights. They were positioned so that one word could be read from above. Honor. And yet people inexorably want light, he said. Suddenly, the rustle of tires was heard. A minibus from the regional TV channel drove around the corner. The cameraman raised his camera, but Amin came up and covered the lens with his hand. Not today, brother, not today. The journalist nodded. He was a conscript from the same company and simply chose a different weapon. A microphone. Then at least tell me, he muttered, that everything will be different. It will be, but not on its own. We will have to do it, Sergei answered. And you too. There were 3 hours left until dawn. The veterans jumped into the Tiger. The door slammed shut. The engine growled quietly, respectfully, as if understanding the burden it was carrying. They drove to the hospital to visit one of the beaten detainees, who had been in a coma for 3 weeks. Thus the night ended and a new shift began. The machines in the admissions department were quietly beeping. The nurse looked up and froze, seeing people in camouflage. Sergei approached the young man's bed and read the chart. Cranial trauma, broken ribs, familiar statistics of a time of peace but a war of morals. Will he wake up? Seth asked. The chances are 50-50, the nurse answered. The veteran sat down on a chair. His palm lay on the young man's cold wrist. Hold on, son, we figured it out. Now you're not alone. The cold of his slow fingers responded with warmth. Chernov smiled microscopically, barely noticeably. We'll treat every bone, he said. I swear. The steps of the reporter, who had followed them despite their refusal, rang out dully in the hospital corridor. He was photographing the sign of the trauma department and the empty corridor, not knowing that the best was happening inside the ward, where the old soldier was holding the hand of a crippled young man and translating words of pain into the language of hope. When they left, the sky began to turn pale. The east was blazing orange, as if the St. George ribbon had melted into the morning clouds. Time to go home, said Amin. Time, agreed Sergei. But first take me to the market. I need wire. Dahlias require support. Aren't you tired yet? Alexei grinned. Once a flower has sprouted, it can't be broken. They left, leaving behind the hospital, the department, the dead of night. Ahead was a day full of paperwork, protocols, interrogations. But at this dawn, the long-standing spine of fear cracked, and light seeped through the crack. And even if the hole quickly healed, Chernov knew that their silent brotherhood would gather again as soon as the chain of humiliation clanked on someone else's shoulder strap. He hung his head and dozed off to the roar of the engine. Amin looked at the road, wiping rainwater from his face like tears of which he was not ashamed. The day would be hard, but already honest. The pink dawn warmed the roof of a dilapidated house on the outskirts. In the window, where the peeling baguette, glory to the airborne forces, used to hang, a draft was now walking, carrying the fresh smell of damp earth. Sergei Ivanovich went out into the yard. He leaned on a cane. In his free hand he held a wooden box with seedlings, young shoots of dahlias, tiny and bold. He put the box by the bed, sat down, touched the cold soil, saturated with rain, with his fingers. Somewhere in the distance the city was humming, buses, traders, a school bell. But here, between the apple tree and the abandoned barn, there was silence, more important than any music. It was hard to hold the shovel, but he stubbornly dug. Each lump of earth, smelling of black soil, reminded him of other excavations, of those where they found mines at bayonet point, of those where they cut stone, dug dugouts. The earth kept the memory of his fingers, the memory of pain. He transplanted the shoots one by one, carefully covering them with a loose pile. This work took away excess noise, the honking of cars, the rustle of news, the whisper of official justifications. Here only the directness of movement remained. The young figure of Yegor flashed over the fence, returning from school. He ran into the yard, throwing his backpack on the bench. "Grandpa, they praise you on the radio," he shouted. "Let the wind praise the radio," the veteran grinned, leaning on the handle of his shovel. "We know who's worth what." The young man bit his lip and sat down next to her, helping to tamp the earth. "I distinguished myself today," he said quietly. "I stood up when the teacher said that veterans are history. I replied that they are real, and that I was thinking of giving me a bad grade, and she said, 'You are right.'" The veteran smiled. The shadows under his eyes turned into soft rays. A neighbor, an old woman, Irina Petrovna, appeared from behind the fence. She was holding a paper cup of hot milk. "Sergei Ivanovich, is this for you? Drink it while it is warm," she said. "We are proud." He nodded and, thanking her, accepted the cup. A UAZ pulled up to the road. Amin and Alexei got out of the cab. They did not go inside. They waved their hands from behind the fence. "We are checking how your flowers are doing." "They will live," Sergei shouted. "If we live honestly." The friends smiled and drove away. They were on their way to the military registration and enlistment office to give a lecture to conscripts on personal responsibility. Yegor strengthened the last bush and asked, Grandpa, what's next? Spring, flowers, exams. And what about those policemen? The law. The law must work, not fear. The grandson nodded. His grandfather's army dog tag gleamed on his neck, a souvenir and a promise. The wind stirred the old St. George ribbon on the gate. Its color had faded, but the strength of the stripes had not dimmed. So, the service continues? The boy asked. Service is when you don't retreat, the veteran answered, even if the front is now in papers and offices. He put the shovel against the fence, straightened up, and examined the even row of chutes. Each had a place, support, warmth. There was damp earth on his palms. He stretched his arms to the sky like a bloodless banner and quietly said, "Any strength grows from roots. Let the roots not rot." The gate creaked behind him. The boy went out into the street first, like a scout. The veteran followed, leaving behind a neat row of the future, in which what people tried to trample yesterday would blossom. He knew that ahead there would be reports, commissions, long nights of interrogations, but there would also be dahlias, and morning fogs over the river, and the funny cries of schoolchildren at the stadium. And every morning he would go out into the yard to check if some thin leg had broken, requiring support that he could give even now. And so the service continued, where instead of an order there was conscience, instead of a weapon there was care, and instead of a medal there was silence in which you could hear flowers growing. 2 weeks later, the hall of the City Officers Club resembled an army hangar. Cold light, rows of chairs, the smell of titanium from old spotlights. A long table was set up on a wide podium for public hearings on the results of the police department inspection. No posters, no fanfares, only microphones and piles of documents. Veterans sat in the front row, some in formal suits, some in dress uniforms, and some in shabby cloth jackets without shoulder straps. With all this on their hearts, shoulder straps become superfluous. Nearby were the mothers of the detainees, lawyers, journalists. Sergei Ivanovich arrived late. His leg was giving him away. Yegor led him in and helped him sit down. Opposite him, on the other side of the aisle, the captain, now a former one, kept his head down. He was wearing a civilian sweater, too new for a seasoned man. Probably bought in the morning to hide a neck without shoulder straps. The meeting began with a speech by a representative of the Ministry of Defense. He listed the violations, cited figures and dates. His words sounded distant, as if he were reading a bomb disposal manual. But every word lay like a heavy metal weight on someone's conscience. 26 cases of abuse of power and 11 cases of loss of material evidence were recorded. 2 deaths occurred in the cell. People sighed, someone whispered a prayer. Then the floor was given to witnesses. A young man with a bandaged head approached the table and told how he was beaten, demanded to confess to a theft he did not commit. A woman who owned a village store explained how she was forced to sign a waiver of claims. Their voices trembled, not from fear, but from the tension that arises when the silence is finally broken. The captain was called last. He stood up, leaned forward, his lips twitched. "I," he began and fell silent. "I am not looking for excuses." A ringing silence reigned in the room. It seemed that even the lamps had stopped humming. "I joined the police to protect," he said. "But one day I decided that the uniform gives me the right not to listen, but to order, and I stopped seeing people." He looked up and met Sergei Ivanovich's gaze. There was no triumph in that gaze, only weariness. "Apologizing will not return what is broken," the captain continued. "I am ready to be punished. But I ask for a chance to fix this, to work on a construction site for the families of the victims, to organize legal consultations." The room froze. The prosecutor wrote something down. The deputy minister nodded, saying, "The petition has been accepted. The court will make a decision." After the official part, the people stood up, but did not disperse. They formed an invisible circle around Sergei Ivanovich. Some shook his hand. Some nodded silently. A woman in a lilac headscarf came, the same one who had tried to stand up for him at the bus stop. She brought a small box containing a pair of garden shears, recently repaired. The blades gleamed like new. "I thought you needed them more," she said. The veteran smiled and put the shears in his jacket pocket. The former captain approached. He spoke quietly, but his words carried to the nearest rows. "What did you forgive me for?" "Nobody talked about forgiveness," Chernov answered. "They talked about the right to correct." The captain fell silent, lowering his eyes, then said firmly, "Then let me help restore the monument." They were talking about the memorial where a fascist bullet froze in stone next to the names of the fallen. A year ago, the slab had cracked, and repairs were postponed until funds were allocated. "If you work with your hands," the veteran nodded, "the slab will hold up." Everyday conversations flowed. Someone asked for the contact details of lawyers. Someone shared stories about inspections in other areas. Amin went up on stage, but not to speak. He was helping his mother walk around the podium. The scene looked unremarkable, almost gray, but something important was being born under this ordinariness. A social contract that the law stands above form and respect above fear. When the hall emptied, Yegor sat down next to his grandfather. "Are you tired? Like after the march?" "I'm afraid," he answered. "But for good reason. I signed up as a volunteer," the young man said. "I'll help the lawyers collect documents." A good march. They went outside. Heavy clouds hung over the officers' club, but a narrow strip of sunset burned in the west. The aroma of hot chestnuts penetrated the smell of damp concrete. Somewhere in the yard, children were roasting nuts over a fire. The captain stood near the main entrance. He was holding a box of cement and a bucket of tools. "Let's go," he said, looking at the veteran. "Where, to the stove? It's not dark yet. We'll have time to fill the seams before the rain." The three of them set off. An old man with a cane, a young man with a rucksack of documents, a man without shoulder straps, with a bucket of cement. They walked slowly but confidently. Each step echoed like a blow on the pavement slabs, as if minting new lines of the anthem. The square near the monument smelled of wet granite. The floorboards of the scaffolding creaked under the feet of the hurrying volunteers. Someone had brought floodlights to work at night. A former captain, dressed in construction gloves, was mixing the mortar. His movements were awkward. His palms were used to holding a protocol, not a trowel. But veterans were standing nearby, and patient approval was read in every look. This is how a soldier is taught to hold a rifle again after being wounded. "Don't rush," Amin advised. "Let the mortar gain density." "Like this," said prompted, showing how to expel an air bubble from the mixture. Sergei Ivanovich leaned against the fence, leaning on his cane. He watched the former accusers and their victims working nearby, separating the concrete and the branches of the spotlights. Instant justice rarely happens in the world, but today the lid of a wicked habit was tightened a little tighter. When the mortar was laid in the last embroidered seam, the family of the young man from the hospital came out to the square. He was moving on crutches. His face was still covered with stitches, but his smile was clear. His mother was squeezing his hand, and he, seeing the veterans, gave him a thumbs up. Yegor went up to him and helped him down. The two peers stood next to each other, like sleepers on a new road. At that moment, the lanterns lit up at once. The monument shone in the yellow light, and the fresh slab reflected the rays so purely that it seemed the stone was crying. An inscription appeared on it. "Thin as a nerve. Memory of dishonor." Dead armor. The former captain took off his gloves and handed them to the veteran. "Take them. I ruined the first pair while I was learning." Sergei Ivanovich took the gloves and looked at his grandson. "Look," he said, "a person changes when his hands have work to do." The rain began, as always, suddenly. It was beating down with cold drops. The people did not run away. They covered their wet hair with their palms and laughed with delight. And then the chorus began. Neither a march nor a hymn. A song from a soldier's campfire, an old one, with simple words about the road home. Some sang along out of tune, some choked up, but everyone sang, even those whose vocal cords were accustomed to orders, not to melody. This harmony of voices had its own armor, the armor of the living, who chose not to remain silent. By midnight, the cement had set. The streetlights went out, but a light burned in every window. People put candles on the windowsill. as if passing the guard to a neighbor. Sergei Ivanovich returned home slowly, as if after a difficult journey. Yegor walked alongside. Passers-by gave way not by rank, but by right of the discoverer of a new path. At the gate, the veteran turned around. A wet slab glistened in the distance. He touched his chest. There, under his jacket, lay a note that the recovered young man had handed him. "Thank you for lifting the lid." He did not open it. He already knew what was written there. A request to live on and remember. The house smelled of damp earth. The seedlings were moved to the hallway so they wouldn't get wet from the rain. "We'll plant them tomorrow," Yegor said. "Tomorrow?" Sergei agreed. He turned off the light and listened to the silence. The silence did not oppress, it breathed. Somewhere an old chandelier was crackling, and in the basement a surviving rat was creaking. But all this seemed like the music of a full breath. Peering into the darkness, the veteran realized, fear is not a scream or a blow. It is emptiness. And today they poured cement into this emptiness, poured tea, planted flowers, and sang a song. This would be enough to keep the night from falling into the abyss. He sat on the edge of the bed, took off his boots, and his foot gratefully quietly fell silent. The veteran closed his eyes. Outside, the wind ruffled the branches. A whisper could be heard in his breath. The service continues. He smiled for the first time in many years before falling asleep. A new day lay ahead, no less difficult, but no longer lonely. A day later, the city was tired of talking. The rain washed away the last newspaper headlines from the kiosks. On the outskirts, in a small club of the bus depot, people were gathering. Mechanics after their shift, a librarian, a pensioner, a teacher, medical students. They were heading towards a round table on which stood 2 kerosene lamps and a thick notebook with a crumpled cover. "This is a book of observations," Yegor explained, leafing through the blank pages. "Anyone can write down an incident of humiliation or abuse that they saw and leave a contact. We pass it on to the lawyers." A mechanic named Krupenikov scratched his warm neck. "Do you think it will help?" "It will help if hundreds sign up, not dozens," the boy answered. "The law loves numbers." The door opened. Sergei Ivanovich entered. He was leaning on a new cane, a gift from a hardware store where there was an unspoken duty to veterans. "Have you signed up?" he asked, smiling. The people nodded. The librarian put another lamp on the table. "The light must be bright, so that no one makes a mistake in the letters." "Remember," the veteran said, "a complaint is also a service. It protects without weapons." A medical student handed him a glass of compote. "So that you have strength." He drank, feeling the taste of dried fruit, the taste of childhood, the taste of peace between the slaughterhouses. When the last signature was written in the notebook, the lamps went out. The kerosene ran out, but no one noticed right away. The windows were illuminated by the whitish light of the early moon. Someone said quietly, "See, even the sky has been painted." They laughed silently, only with the sparkle in their eyes. Going outside, the veteran turned his face to the fresh wind. The rails thundered on the horizon. The evening train was heading south. He thought about those inside, conscripts, shift workers, mothers with children. Each carried his own load of hopes and fears. "May their road be softer," he whispered. Yegor approached, holding a notebook pressed to his chest. "Grandpa, this book is heavy." "Heaviness is a sign of reality," the veteran answered. "The real always weighs. The light is carried away by the wind." They walked home along an empty street where the yellow windows of the rare houses pulsed like distant signal lights. And in each window lived someone who might one day cross the street to write down what he saw and say, "Today I did not remain silent." At the end of the block stood a brand new road sign, Main Road. Yegor smiled. Straight ahead," Sergei Ivanovich confirmed and was the first to step onto the fresh asphalt, leaving behind the club, the book, and the lamps that would someday be lit again. When will new people need to not remain silent?